Yeah, sorry for the delay. Sorry for the technical craziness. It's just I've been super busy at work and I had no time to prepare. I just ran here straight from work because I was really excited to tell you guys everything that's been going on. I haven't been able to do a video in a quite a long time because I've been basically on a business trip ever since right before this military operation began. So I want to thank all of you for sticking around 40 minutes after I said this stream would start. I see there's only 24 people now when there were around 45 at the beginning, but this is what I'm going to basically talk about. I'm going to talk about my experience. I was right right next to Donbass in Russia, in the Rostov region of Russia when this conflict began, when the Russian military operation began, and I'm going to share with you my experience there, and coming back to Moscow, I'm going to share with you all a bit about what life is like with these new American and European sanctions here, because and I'm also going to give you a bit of background because I've been following this this whole conflict since the beginning, and a lot of people are saying different things. A lot of people, you know, the liberals in the West are saying that, oh, Russia, you know, plans to invade Ukraine, and this is just evidence of it because of this military operation. And then the Russians are saying, well, no, that's not the case. So I'm going to give you the perspective, what I think is true, as someone who was following it from the beginning. And I'll give you a spoiler. I don't think I don't think that the Western predictions of a Russian invasion were actually true. I think the West created this situation for itself, and I'll tell you why now. And also, we'll do Q&A at the end. Okay, I'll try to get through everything as quickly as possible and give you as many details as possible as well. But basically, this all started really several months ago. The lead up to this this military operation, when the United States, not European security services, but United States security services said they had evidence, and also the Ukrainian government was saying this as well. They had evidence that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, completely unprovoked over the winter. This is what they said. They were saying several months ago, probably around September, October. And at that point, Russia was like, Russia didn't understand why the West was saying this stuff. I mean, Russia had done nothing aggressive, and in the media, this sort of hysteria continued. It was like a snowball effect, really. The fact that the Western media continued and the Ukrainian officials continued to play up this idea of a Russian invasion, and numerous periodicals, specifically like the Bild and the German tabloid Bild and the British also tabloid The Sun, they started making stories about how Russia had this plan to invade and occupy Ukraine and put anyone who disagreed with Putin into concentration camps and set up a puppet government. And this was going on for months, and this was being used to justify an intensification of militarization of NATO near the Russian border. Not only the further militarization of NATO positions in Eastern Europe, but also the shipping of weapons and intensification of training of the Ukrainian special forces, and the shipping of weapons there. So far, aside from the weapons that Germany and Spain and the United States and the UK have been promising to ship to Ukraine during this conflict, they were shipping serious weaponry to them months before. This was happening over the span of the past several months, and even you could even take it farther back as well, because since this conflict began 8 years ago in 2014, when the Euromaidan coup d'etat happened, when this Yanukovych was overthrown by a violent Western-backed coup that was connected with neo-fascist groups, Ever since then, there have been U.S. military advisors here. Neo-fascist militias have gotten aid from the United States and training. The special forces there have gotten training as well. And sure, some people are going to say, well, in 2018, the United States passed a law that forbade the U.S. government from giving weapons and training to these neo-fascist groups in Ukraine. But the reality is that the majority of these neo-fascist groups actually integrated into the official National Guard of the Ukrainian military. The biggest and most famous example is the Azov Battalion. So while it became, against the United States law to give weapons to the Azov Battalion became part of the official military, and the official military definitely does receive money and weapons and training from the United States. So this is a loophole that developed. But my point is that this whole situation, this whole Russian operation, this offensive, this came after months and months and months of a Western media campaign and further Western militarization of Eastern Europe, specifically in Ukraine, while the entire time Russia was trying to negotiate. Russia was trying to solve this issue with diplomacy. I mean, the thing that Russia had been trying to push for over these past several months was for Ukraine not to be a NATO state, for Russia to have security guarantees that NATO is not going to expand farther east, which is something that NATO had promised Russia back in even 1991 to Mikhail Gorbachev when he was the president of the USSR and the USSR was still around. They were promised this. And also, another thing that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has brought up numerous times is that NATO expansion farther east even violates even violates several treaties that were agreed upon for collective security in Europe. The fact that European countries are obviously supposed to be allowed to join whatever military alliances they want to be a part of, but they're not. This is also not supposed to infringe on the security of other countries. And this is something that Russia's been saying for a long time. And it has, this is clearly infringing on Russia's security. And here's what made Russia carry out this military offensive. It's the fact that basically the day before Vladimir Putin recognized the independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, the Ukrainian military resumed an offensive in Donbass, which I have to remind you, the Ukrainian military was indiscriminately bombing Donbass over the span of the past 8 years. I was there many times. I heard the Ukrainians shelling the city. We ourselves went to the airport that was completely bombed by Ukrainians and by the Ukrainian military, and we saw how they conducted indiscriminate bombing of people. We spoke to civilians whose lives had been completely negatively changed because of indiscriminate bombing of towns and not even military positions. This had been happening over the span of 8 years. This is why Vladimir Putin has been accusing Ukraine of genocidal acts. This is one of the things he's talking about. The fact that the Donbass people have been living under indiscriminate shelling for 8 years. And finally, the Ukrainians resumed an offensive into Donbass just a day before Putin said that he was going to recognize the independence of the Donbass People's Republics. And also, the Ukrainian members of parliament were talking about getting nuclear weapons. This specifically, Tymoshenko was leading the call for this, for Ukraine to get nuclear weapons, which is absolutely insane to have. I mean, this is like as if Russia had sponsored a government coup d'état in Mexico and then gave them nuclear weapons. I mean, we all remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. This would have been even worse. Russia could not permit this kind of breach of its national security on its border. And of course, that connected with the fact that they were, with the fact that Russia had long seen what was going on in Donbass as unjust, but was trying to get Ukraine to adhere to the Minsk protocols, which were a peace agreement that were agreed to by both sides of the conflict. And for all these years, they were trying to get Kiev to abide by it, but they were not. They continuously violated these Minsk protocols, indiscriminately bombing Donbass. It's all well documented, and of course, the Ukrainians on the other side are going to say, well, the Donbass People's Militias also violated the ceasefires, and obviously, when they're being shot at constantly, indiscriminately, they are going to fire back sometimes, and the biggest evidence of the fact that it was the Ukrainian military that was violating the Minsk protocols overwhelmingly is the fact that the percentage of civilian casualties was overwhelmingly in Donbass as a result of Ukrainian bombing. And that is the biggest indication of the fact that it was really the Ukrainian side that's been violating this for so many years. Basically, now, what does Russia want from this military operation? This is an important, there's a lot of important details that we have to talk about here, because everyone in the West, the Western media is saying like, oh, we were right, Russia's invading Ukraine, he wants to take Ukraine and make it part of Russia, and he wants to occupy it. This is complete nonsense, actually. The last thing Russia wants to do is occupy Ukraine. And the reason for that is because occupation, first of all, what Russia has been focusing on right now in this operation has actually been negotiating. They've time and time again tried to get the Ukrainian delegation to the negotiating table so they can work out an agreement. And there's three main points that Russia has been calling for. First of all is demilitarization of Ukraine. They don't want Ukraine to be a military threat to Russia anymore, and they certainly don't want them to have nuclear weapons. The second thing is denazification. So the Russian government has actually already started an investigation into the war crimes, and it's about time. They've launched an investigation into the war crimes that have been committed by these neo-fascist groups like Azov Battalion, like Right Sector, the M19 militia, I think they're called, but there's tons of others. The Svoboda Party as well. They've launched an investigation into the war crimes that they've committed, because it's important to note that the majority of the soldiers and the brigades that were located near Donbass and have been committing this indiscriminate shelling have been these neo-fascist groups. It's important to differentiate, like the Ukrainian military has volunteers, and these are mostly neo-fascist groups, and they have conscripts. These are like just Ukrainians who were basically conscripted into the military, and to be honest, a lot of them are basically laying down their arms, abandoning their equipment. This was the same thing in 2014. These conscripts do not have a will to fight their own countrymen, because it's completely messed up to indiscriminately kill your own people. And that's exactly why the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics don't want to go back to Ukraine. But anyway, my original point is that, so denazification, they want, that's Russia's second demand. They want these neo-Nazis to be held to account, and they want them to be put on trial and answer for their crimes. And that is completely righteous. But the third thing is that they want Ukraine to be a neutral country. Basically, Ukraine doesn't have to be friends with Russia, but they do not want it to be part of NATO. These are the three major demands that Russia has of Ukraine, and that they're not budging on at the negotiating table. But going back to what I was talking about before, Russia is trying to negotiate here. They're trying to. They've been pushing these negotiations. Zelensky has gone back and forth. He said, "I do want to negotiate. I don't. I do. I don't." But they finally sat down at the negotiating table just today. The second round of of negotiations took place between Russia and Ukraine. They agreed to set up some humanitarian corridors, but in general, Zelensky is buying his time. I mean, he's biding for time because he's waiting for weapons to come in from Europe. He's waiting for thousands of international volunteers that are pro-Ukraine to come and fight, help the military fight Russia. So that's what Ukraine is really buying more time now, and Russia kind of knows that, but at the same time really needs these negotiations to go well, and they need to come to an agreement with the Zelensky government, and they need to not overthrow the Ukrainian government and leave. And I'll tell you why that is. Because occupying a country, which if the Ukrainian government, the current Ukrainian government is overthrown, Russia will need to occupy the country. This is something that Putin has already said time and time again he does not want to do. Why? Because if the government is overthrown, then a military occupation is super costly, it takes a long time, and there's no doubt going to be an insurgency of these neo-fascists, and on top of other people who, are not going to want to see a Russian occupation in their country. I mean, we could look at Afghanistan, we can look at the example of Afghanistan. The United States had to occupy that country, and it was there for 20 years and lost in the end, Russia doesn't want that. Russia wants to be able to come to an agreement with the current government that has basically created this problem with its lack of willingness to negotiate throughout these months. I mean, and then saying they're going to get nuclear weapons, and then returning to an invasion of Donbass. They created this situation. Russia had no other choice but to conduct a special operation against them, and And Russia doesn't want to annex Ukraine. It doesn't want to have an occupation there. It doesn't want to put people in camps like the Sun said, or build. I mean, that's just like crazy to suggest, especially with these sanctions that have been put on Russia, the most crippling sanctions that have ever been put on Russia. I mean, it's like the economy is going to have to be like North Korea soon, probably. Why would the Russian government want to put that much more of a burden on its economy, having to sustain an occupation, losing the lives of its own soldiers, spending that many more resources, making basically everyone's life harder? Russia doesn't want that. Russia wants Zelensky to stay in power, and Russia wants him to stay neutral. And that's basically that's the nuance of the situation. It's not like Russia just wants to land grab and occupy the place. Russia didn't even want to launch this offensive in the first place. Back when the U.S. was saying that Russia was planning for an invasion, they were saying we were not planning an invasion. But then all of a sudden, they say they're going to get nuclear weapons, and they themselves resume an invasion of the Ukrainians. You resume their invasion of Donbass. So what else is Russia supposed to do in that situation? And this is kind of reminded me actually of what happened in 1939 actually with regard to Poland and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It's not the same situation, but this is another. But they're both situations in which we have to be careful when we talk about what specifically does an invasion mean, what specifically does an occupation mean, what specifically does a war mean, a special operation. Because in 1939, everyone says that the Soviet Union invaded Poland, okay, and that they cut a secret deal with the Nazis to carve up Poland. But this was not, the situation did not actually play out like that. First of all, when Soviet troops moved into what was Eastern Poland, by the way, parts of Eastern Poland that Poland had taken from Ukraine and Belarus just, if I'm not mistaken, around 20 years earlier. So they really weren't even Polish territories. They were Polish imperial territories. But the land that the Soviet Union moved into actually was not Poland anymore. So it was because the government left. The government abandoned the country after the Nazis invaded. The Nazis invaded Poland. The government cut and ran to Romania, and Romania was a neutral country, so they had to intern the government there, otherwise that would look hostile to Nazi Germany. And according to international law, in such an instance, the state and country of Poland ceased to exist. So the Soviet Union, what we call an invasion of Poland right now, was actually, according to international law, the Soviet Union moving its troops into unclaimed territory at that point, because the government had given up its jurisdiction over that. And the reason why I think in this current situation, why it's not fair to call the Russian special operation an invasion, I think it's fair to call it a war. I think, I work at RT. I work at a state Russian media company, and the Russian Roskomnadzor, the organization that deals with Russian television, they want state television to call it the special military operation, but we at RT, we're still able to call it a war because that's really what it is. It is a special operation. It is a war because it's happening between Russia and Ukraine. But to call it an invasion is something different, actually, because invasion connotates an intention to land grab, an intention to occupy, militarily occupy, and completely overthrow the government of the country that you're invading. And that's just not what Russia wants to do. Russia wants to defang Ukraine and leave the government the way it is. That's what Putin has been saying, and that's not only, we don't only have to go by his words, but we can also go by the actions of the Russian military. Like, the Russian military encircled Kiev within the first day of the operation. It's day 8. To me, I've been seeing in Western media that they've been saying that this slow advance of the Russian military is because Ukraine is really having major military successes against the Russian military. This is complete nonsense. If the Russian military is you could argue the second or third strongest in the world, and Ukraine is not even close. It doesn't matter how many weapons it gets from the West. If Russia conducted war in the way that the United States conducts war in, for example, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, where it just comes in and annihilates everything, just raw power onto what it's attacking, Ukraine would have been done within the first day. But that's not how Russia is conducting warfare. It's not conducting a war of annihilation in the same way that the U.S. government conducts. It's actually conducting a special military operation where it's targeting only military infrastructure and facilities. Now, does this mean that civilians are not dying? No. War sucks. It really does. And in war, there's no way to avoid civilian casualties. The only thing you can do is to minimize them as much as possible. And when I say I support the Russian military operation, I'm not saying I support war. I am super anti-war, and everyone who has known me for years, who has been, who I was an activist with in university, who I developed my political leanings towards Marxism, Leninism with throughout my life, knows that I'm anti-war. But the thing is, this war did not start with the Russian military operation. It started 8 years ago when the Euromaidan happened, and the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics declared independence because they didn't want to be part of a government that was connected to neo-fascists. And Ukraine, and they had legal referendums. They had referendums that are constitutional according to the Ukrainian constitution. Regions, according to the Ukrainian constitution, are allowed to have referendums and leave peacefully. And they did exactly that. But the Ukrainian government said that that was just Russian occupation, even though it wasn't. And so the Ukrainian military invaded these people's republics that had legal referendums to declare independence. They invaded sovereign nations 8 years ago. And since then, they've been carrying out an indiscriminate bombing campaign. they've killed they basically around 14,000 people have died in this conflict, and the overwhelming amount of casualties, the casualties have been overwhelmingly in Donbass. So this Russian military operation is finally going to put an end to it. It's the only thing that's going to put an end to this war, and that's why people who are anti-war should support the special military operation, because peace, the Minsk protocols, they have not done anything. Russia has tried to hold Ukraine to the Minsk protocols for 8 years, and it's done absolutely nothing. It sucks that war is, that this military operation is killing people and everything. That really sucks. But the only solution to this war, unfortunately, is force. It's the only language that the Ukrainian government understands. And that much became even more clear when we saw the way that Kiev wages war. It's distributed weapons across the country to anyone who can show up and say, I want a weapon. They've released prisoners. The Kiev government has released prisoners and given them weapons. They've given random civilians weapons, and on the first day of this mass distribution of weapons to random people, there were already reports of friendly fire. There were already reports of the Ukrainian military killing civilians who had been issued weapons because they thought that they were Russians. And so this is like an indication of of how Ukraine is conducting war. And a lot of people, both sides of the conflict, are saying this side is spreading disinformation, that side is spreading disinformation. I've been following both sides, and to be honest, I've been following specifically also the statements that are being released by the Russian Ministry of Defense. I have not found one thing that they've been disingenuous about. But on the Ukrainian side, I can give you several examples. The first one is Snake Island. Snake Island is located off the coast of Ukraine, and the Kiev government said that the Russians came along, and and the Ukrainians said "F you, Russia," and the Russians just slaughtered them all. And Zelensky even gave them medals. Posthumous medals for bravery, and then it shows they showed up actually on RT. We got footage of them. They actually voluntarily surrendered to Russian troops because they didn't want to fight Russia, and they're right now in Russian custody. But the Ministry of Defense said publicly if Ukrainians lay down their arms, they're not going to be hurt, and that's exactly what happened on Snake Island. And that was after everyone in the Western media and Ukraine were like hailing them as martyrs, but they didn't even die; they surrendered. Another thing is that in Chernobyl, the Russian military came along, and the Ukrainian military that was there, basically they just surrendered. They said, "We'll agree to defend the Chernobyl exclusion zone along with you." And there's been tons of other examples of Ukrainian military surrendering these kinds of cases. Another thing is that another thing that we can look at is the fact that Kiev has been surrounded since day one, and Russia has secured a corridor, a highway out of the city, and has publicly announced that Ukrainian civilians can use this corridor to escape the city safely, just in case a battle like a full-on battle for Kiev begins. Because right now there's skirmishes around Kiev and there's been explosions and bombings, but there's not a full-blown attack for it. And the Kiev authorities said that they're not allowed to go. There's footage also of people being shot in the street that have been violating curfew. Some Ukrainian town governments have said that looters should be shot on sight. It's absolutely nuts. Just recently, just 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been 3. Kiev began allowing Ukrainians in the city to leave by train to Poland and European countries, but they're still not allowing them to go to down through this highway. And that, there's obviously a lot of Ukrainians leaving as well. There's already over 800,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, who have left Ukraine. Not only to Poland and European countries, but also to Russia, because the first people to flee were from Donbass, because the authorities declared a full-on evacuation, and over 100,000 civilians left before the offensive began, and that's good. Russia's set up like temporary housing facilities all over the country where these evacuees can stay and wait the conflict out, basically. And that basically goes to this goes into the next part of what I wanted to say. I'm going to come away from the more global political understanding of what's going on to my personal experience there. During the Q&A, we can go back to the politics, but I was basically sent there I was sent to Rostov region in Russia. And I was sent to a town called Taganrog, which is located right next to the border with Donbass. And I was sent there several days, or maybe 1 or 2 days before Russia recognized the independence of Donbass People's Republics. And then the next day they started the military operations. So I was sent there because already tensions were rising and everyone knew that something was going to happen. But I got there, and the first thing I was covering, I remember why I was sent there, specifically because the evacuation was declared, the evacuation, and thousands of people from Donbass started fleeing to Russia immediately when they heard that, a Ukrainian invasion was going to happen, because they were preparing for another invasion. Remember, Ukraine resumed their invasion first, before the Russian military offensive began. And so thousands of people were fleeing. I went and did reports. I'm going to put these on the YouTube channel soon. I went and did reports on temporary housing facilities that these people went to, like schools that were converted to this, with gyms that had beds set up, like it looked like apocalyptic stuff, like a zombie apocalypse, government setting up temporary housing facilities and stuff. But the government was able, it's actually very impressive, the fact that the regional government of Rostov and regional governments all over Russia were able to set up hundreds of temporary housing facilities within 2 days. It was incredible. But I gotta tell you, I did interviews with all of these people coming from Donbass, and they all, it's from them that I'm getting the information that I'm telling you about this indiscriminate artillery shelling of Donbass. Like, these people were like in tears. They were completely sad about their situation, because to them, 2015, 2014, these years were super traumatic for them, and they just saw everything coming back, like they were going to have to go through this crazy stuff again. And everyone was thankful to Russia. Everyone was, didn't understand why Ukraine was bombing them for 8 years. We even had to, at RT, we even had to cut out some of the stuff that people were saying, because they were so pro-Putin, so pro-Russian government, that we were trying to tone it down a little, and just basically take the more emotional side of their story, their personal story, because we were not trying to just make propaganda oh yeah, Putin's the man, blah 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 blah. We're trying to show the real emotional stories of these people, and how they really have been suffering at the hands of Ukrainian despotism. That's what, and war crimes. What they did were what they've been committing are war crimes. There's no other word for it. And it was just really sad to see these people. Spoke with a lot of people, just didn't even want to talk about it because they were super upset. Obviously, they had to leave their homes, and with little more than the shirts on their backs. But a lot of people in tears, a lot of older people and children. And then the Russian offensive was declared, and pretty much immediately, I mean, where we were, there weren't any bombs that fell like 5 minutes away from me, but the region where we were in and not too far away was bombed almost immediately when the Russian military offensive began. Because remember, the Ukrainian line was actually very close to the Russian border at that point. Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics originally had only actually held half of the actual regions of Lugansk and Donetsk. And so the Ukrainian military was close to the Russian line, and they had bombed basically every Russian region that bordered Donbass. At the very beginning, there were bombings. The day after the beginning of the Russian military offensive, the region where I was located, just about an hour's drive away, there was heavy artillery shelling. There were at least 14 artillery shells that fell on Russian territory near where I was located. So we were in, a war zone, and we had to bring helmets and vests and everything. But then after that, basically, I went to the border, as some of you that have been following my work have seen. We covered the people going to a temporary housing facility at the border there in tents. We did interviews with people. And then basically, with this situation, I had to come home several days ago, back to Moscow. Out of necessity, because of the fact that sanctions have hit Russia very hard. Basically, everyone's salary is worth like 60 or 70% of what it was worth before. Prices of things that rely on foreign imports have skyrocketed, specifically electronics. But Russia has actually a pretty developed domestic economy already, because they've been dealing with sanctions since basically since 2014. It was kind of a wake-up call. So food prices here are okay and everything, but basically nobody's going to be able to go abroad with much money, unfortunately. And this has caused a lot of pressure for people, and a lot of people have decided, a lot of foreigners have decided to, who are working at RT with us, have decided to leave because of the stress, the sanctions, and as you probably already know, it's all public information that several people have quit. And I think one of the main reasons why a lot of people are feeling a lot of pressure is because we've received tons of death threats, tons of harassment on the internet. And to those who have been actually very supportive, because I've gotten tons of support from people on the internet as well, saying that asking where they can watch RT because it's blocked where they are, or that they really appreciate the work that I've been doing. And I've gotten thousands of more subscribers on Twitter, and hundreds more on Instagram, and I hope to get more on YouTube as well. But it's really actually not easy for us right now at RT. Everyone is receiving death threats from these nasty people who are connected somehow, I don't know, to who are just like fanatical, either liberals or neo-fascists. My address has been published, and I've been directly threatened. My parents have been directly threatened, and they sent me their address. So this is like a tremendous amount of pressure that a person can be under. And I'm not going to quit over it. I think the best thing I can do is to stick it to them, is to continue fighting the good fight, and digging further deeper into my position in the information war. But it's completely understandable why a lot of people have left. It's an extreme amount of pressure, and nobody knows, nobody knows who's behind a keyboard, who's threatening your loved ones and publishing their address or pictures of their house. So that's just a tremendous amount of stress for someone to be under, and it's really a reflection of the fact that we are in an information war, you know, and it's kind of ugly, you know, just like real war. I mean, obviously, real war is much uglier, you know, but people, you know, things are getting really nasty, and people are leaving because of that. But that's basically what I wanted to, everything I wanted to say about everything, the basic overview of everything I wanted to say. I'm going to go to questions now, and you can go ahead and ask me whatever you want, like maybe in-depth questions about how sanctions are affecting people here, or about something about the war. I couldn't possibly include everything I want to say about the war and every development about it, because I've been following it so closely every single day. It's too much information. But if you have any specific questions about anything that's been going on, I can most likely answer it. So I'm gonna, yeah, and about keeping the questions civil, if you're gonna like just provoke us, then I'm just not gonna answer it. How will Russia be cooperating more economically with China? Hey Ronnie, good to see you, by the way. Thanks for watching the live stream. How will they be cooperating more closely? Actually, this is a good question. I was just anchoring the program at RT, actually, and we had a special guest from a university in China who's a political expert, and we were discussing exactly this issue, actually. And I think the answer is that things, you know, like areas of the economy that Russia found it more economically viable and advantageous to get from the West before these sanctions hit, they're going to go to China for. And this is undoubtedly going to strengthen the kind of economic cooperation between Russia and China. China's already said, I mean, they've taken like we're not going to take a side in this conflict thing, but NATO and the U.S. obviously, you know, caused this conflict. They gave rise to the conditions that created this. So China, you know, China's like tacitly on Russia's side, you know, but they're definitely going to be engaging in closer economic cooperation. And one interesting thing that I spoke with our guest about, actually, his name was, if I'm not mistaken, Benjamin Chow. One thing we talked about was the possibility of actually China and Russia forming a sort of closer economic cooperation pact, something perhaps along the lines of something similar to like the European Economic Community, but between China and Russia. So we're gonna have to see how that plays out. All right, let's see. What do we got next? Dark Lord of the Sith. Yeah, I do have Russian citizenship. So what does that mean? That means basically I'm affected by the same stuff economically that affects the rest of Russians. I do also have American citizenship, but my salary's in rubles as well, you know, and we've taken a huge hit. It's like we're in a hard crisis right now, but you know what? We'll survive, definitely. And I think, I don't have any doubt about that. I think when the dust clears, we're just going to be stronger. So, question: Russia now out of SWIFT, joined China's CIPS. Do you think that this is a good development for third world countries? Yeah, I think this is a good development for third world countries, because now they're going to have more of an alternative, you know, to in terms of the international economic situation. For example, in Russia, you know, who knows how much longer Visa is going to be able to be used here. MasterCard's already, I'm pretty sure, decided it's not going to do business in Russia anymore. But Russia has its own domestic version of credit card called Mir, which means in Russian both peace and earth. And so this thing, obviously, before these sanctions, nobody really took it seriously. It was like some like knockoff of the mainstream Visa, MasterCard. But now it's really going to take off, I think. Russian domestic things like that are really going to take off. And it's going to provide a real alternative for third world countries that don't want to be part of the imperialist bloc. So I think that's a good thing. Do I think this will strengthen Putin or weaken his position? Well, I think you have to you have to kind of like look at different spheres in terms of this. I mean, you could look at it. Is this going to weaken the Russian economy? Yeah, it already has. But is this going to make Putin more popular in Russia? Yeah, it already has, actually. There's already been a poll that says that came out yesterday or the day before that that said that Putin's popularity has actually risen 10% since after this invasion had taken place, or this military operation began. And if you notice, I mean, there are protests against the war in Russia, but they have been very, very small in comparison to previous protests that we've seen. And that could be one of two reasons. That could be that a lot of people support what Russia decided to do in Ukraine, or it could be that, you know, Navalny's sitting in prison now and he can't start trouble. That could also be another thing. Because we also have to understand that the Russian Communist Party is now the biggest opposition party in the country, and they support this military operation because Gennady Zyuganov, the general secretary of the Communist Party, understands that Ukraine has been committing acts of, you know, they've been committing war crimes and genocidal acts against the Donbass people over the last 8 years. So the Communist Party here supports the military operation. The general atmosphere in Russia right now, I think it's hard to say. It's pretty chaotic. I mean, because all of a sudden sanctions hit and all of a sudden the economy is changed, the world has changed. People are nervous. People are, in a kind of chaotic state of mind. But are they angry at the government? I wouldn't say so. I think everything's going to be fine. I think once the dust settles, everything's going to be back to normal. This is a really good question that Rakesh asks. Will Putin be forced to change his economic policies, maybe embrace some socialist policies due to sanctions placed, even though he's not a communist? This is a really good question, because one of the theories I've been coming up with is that the West has constantly been saying Putin is trying to restore the Soviet Union, that Putin's a communist and this and that. And at the same time that they've been saying this, the reality of Putin is that he is not a communist. I mean, like his policies can, to be honest, they could be compared to like the American Republican Party. He's not a communist, but the West's decisions, the West's creation of this problem in Ukraine, this necessity of Russia to take military action, is really actually creating the material conditions in which Putin is being forced to, like, almost, like, take on the same ideology that the Soviet Union had towards the West during the Cold War. Like, the understanding that the West does not understand diplomacy, it only understands force. Or, I think sooner or later, with the fact that the ruble is, like, experiencing runaway inflation in regard to the ruble, in regard to the dollar and the euro, I think, and the central bank, its assets have been frozen abroad, so it can't really do that much to control it. I think eventually the government is going to have to step in, like, directly, like, as seriously as it used to in the USSR, and control the course of the currency. I don't see any other way out of it. After sanctions in 2014, Russia developed its own domestic industries to prepare for a situation like this. So I think it's very possible that even though Putin's not a communist, he may have to take policies that are reminiscent of those that were in the USSR before 1991. Yeah. looking for other questions now, just a second. Do you think Russia as a country can be self-sufficient as far as food and supplies for its citizens? Yeah, I do think that, actually. Russia actually right now produces far more grain than it did in the USSR. In the USSR, the USSR produced a lot of grain, but it was still reliant on imports. But a couple of years ago, I think a year or two ago, Russia became the world's largest producer of grain. So it also has a lot of very developed domestic industries. I do think it's able to be self-sufficient. Russia has 7 time zones, tons of land, and tons of natural resources, and that's exactly what allowed it to be the motherland of world socialism during the Cold War. So, what's your take on Russia pushing for the DPR LPR's claimed territory rather than the territory they currently control? I'm not sure what the question means, but I'm going to guess what you're talking about is the fact that Russia has sent its troops past what might be considered potentially liberated territory in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. The reason for that is because Russia understands, and they're not trying to occupy Ukraine, like I said. Again, this is not a land grab. The Russian troops have gone farther because they need to create enough pressure on the Ukrainian government to agree to these demands of demilitarization, neutralization, and denazification. And once that happens, Russian troops will leave. But Zelensky is not, he's not negotiating very willingly. So. Does this crisis make KPRF more likely to win in next elections, or is it more likely to some liberal can get more out of it? No, I think in the next elections, the KPRF is going to have an even greater victory than it had in the previous parliamentary elections, which, to remind everyone, they had the best successes for the KPRF since the 1990s. I think this operation is going to be successful. The only reason it hasn't been successful already is because, again, Russia does not want to overthrow the Ukrainian government. They want to come to a consensus in which they come to some sort of agreement and the Russian troops can leave and the Ukrainian government can pick up the pieces of what's happened. And, when that happens, the KPRF is going to be remembered as supporting everything that happened. So I think the KPRF is going to come out in a beneficial position. For the comrade who's asking if I live in Donetsk, no, I live in Moscow, but I've been to Donetsk and Lugansk many times. Any American parties, organizations we can partake in to help? I would suggest trying to participate in the Party of Communists USA, because they've been pretty active with organizing protests against Ukraine, against Western support for Ukraine, and they have actually a direct connection to the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. I personally put them in contact with them. So Party of Communists USA is a good organization to go through with that. Yeah. Do you think Russia and China should join in a pact of mutual assistance to counter NATO or AUKUS? Yeah, I do. I think that would be a great idea. But let's see if it's going to pan out. Will Lugansk and Donetsk go back to socialism? Perhaps. I mean, they are very socialist already. I mean, they have like Soviet memorabilia everywhere, and also in Lugansk they have super state-subsidized housing. Donetsk is a little bit more on the capitalist side, but Lugansk is very reminiscent of its Soviet past. I think probably after the war is over and everything goes back to peacetime, that could be a possibility. Is there any way I can help or donate to help the Donbass people and refugees? I'm having a hard time finding anything. It's all just pro-Ukrainian. Comrade Cowboy Supernaut. I have two things to say about this. I think I'm going to try to open up some sort of charity foundation. That's a really good idea. I think I'm going to try to open up some sort of charity connected to the Revolution Report where you guys could send the money there, because I have direct connections to, for example, the Lugansk Federation of Trade Unions, which is basically the most active civil organization in Lugansk, and they have been conducting charitable operations in the area as well. That would be a really good idea. I'm going to look into organizing that. But I can already point you actually into the direction of RT merchandise. I'm not. I know it might sound like self-promotion here, but it says actually on the website we have these shirts that have the Z on them that the Russian tanks have been painting on them. I'm not sure if it means for Zelensky or if it means for Zapad, which means like West in Russian, but it's become like the symbol of the Russian military operation. We have these shirts on the RT website, rt.com, at the RT shop that have these on them. And if you buy it, all of the proceeds go to the children who have been suffering from the conflict in Donbass. So if you buy the shirt, RT will not receive any of that money. It goes straight to a charity to help the children in Donbass. And actually, we've already started sending humanitarian aid there as well. When I was still in Rostov, a truck of humanitarian aid with Russian military rations and soap and stuff like that, it came through where we were located, because some of the staff that we already had there were transporting it further to Donbass. So I would point you in that direction, the RT shop, to buy specifically those Z shirts. That money will go directly to people affected by the conflict. But I'm also going to try to open up something in connection to the Revolution Report. Let's see. How long do I think the military operation will last? This is also a good question. Russia said that at the beginning of the military operation, which was 8 days ago, so about a week and 1 day has passed. At the beginning of the military operation, Russia said that they plan to have everything done in 2 weeks. And so far, everything, according to the Ministry of Defense in Russia, everything has gone according to plan so far. So, that's a timeline you could look at. I'm thinking if negotiations don't work by then, they're probably just going to try to take Kiev. So we have another 6 days we're looking at. Let's see. Hi Don, keep up the good work. Thanks, Alan Miller. The media and politicians here in the U.S. are playing up increasing civilian casualties. What's your assessment of these claims? I mean, civilian casualties are increasing, but we have to understand why they're increasing and who's responsible for it. The Russian military, I truly believe, based on what I've seen in terms of video footage and what I've heard from people on the ground and my colleagues who are journalists in Donbass, who are still there, is that Russia has been conducting a very calculated strategic military campaign, and that they've been specifically targeting non-civilian institutions. And that doesn't mean that collateral damage still isn't taking place. Of course, like I said at the beginning of this video, it's war and it sucks. But what we do know is that neo-fascist organizations that have been on the retreat since the beginning of Russia's military operation, let's remember that both the Lugansk People's Militia and the Donetsk People's Militia have advanced west tens of kilometers already. The Donetsk People's Republic has advanced a bit slower than the Lugansk People's Republic, but they both significantly advanced since the beginning of this military operation, and the neo-fascist militias have been completely destroying everything they leave behind. They've been bombing villages, complete strategy of scorched earth, and they have not been taking civilians with them. They've been, conducting this very cruel type of warfare, and I think that's the main reason why civilian casualties are increasing. Marxism applied today, I'll give you some clarification there. Lugansk is the size of a city, right? Or am I mistaking Donetsk and Lugansk for something smaller? Donetsk and Lugansk are both cities and regions. So Lugansk is the capital of the Lugansk People's Republic, which is the former region, the former Ukrainian region of Lugansk. And the same goes for Donetsk, just to clarify. Did I get fired today? No. I was anchoring the program today, so no, I did not get fired at RT. Alright, so it doesn't look like there are really any more questions here. I really hope that this was helpful to you all, and I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I'm gonna make sure that I can work out the way the camera can connect to streaming in the future, and also I want to give you basically I'm gonna try to give you guys daily updates on this stuff. I'm gonna try to go live daily for this on my channel to give you day-to-day updates on this stuff until stuff kind of calms down, or until when the military operation comes to an end. But for this one, I think I'm going to call it a night. I hope you guys appreciate it and everything, and I really appreciate you saying that you love my coverage and my work. It's really important for us to hear that right now, especially with people threatening to kill us. So, so that's it for this live, and stay tuned for more soon, because just keep an eye out on my channel, because like I said, I'm going to try to go live pretty much every day or every other day maybe. So definitely keep an eye out. But thanks to everyone for watching, and workers of the world unite.